Hey, welcome to the show. I'm here today with Sarah O'Connor. Sarah, hello. Thank you for being here. How are you?
I am well. Thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure entirely. Today we're going to be talking about publishing tech. We're going to be talking about a lot of the enterprises you're involved with, imposter syndrome, mentors, and a whole bunch of other really interesting, juicy topics. So going right back to the beginning, you've got something like 15 years in publishing before tech. You started off in New York City and then you moved to London quite a while ago. You've been an editor, a commissioning editor, a children's writer, editorial manager, digital director, co-founder, and on and on and on. I mean, your list of achievements is ridiculous, to be
Oh.
to be quite frank. So firstly, I mean, what's this passion for books? You love books. You love being a children's author.
Books have just always been there for me and gotten me through. When I was young, my parents would drop me off at the library while they took my brother to play soccer. And I would just spend, hours in the stacks, touching, smelling the books. But I always loved to read. I always loved stories. And for me, stories let you live a thousand lives. So why wouldn't I lose myself in a book and a story? And for me, it's always been children's books. I've found that grown-up books just aren't as good. They're not as well crafted. They're not as precise, and sometimes they're extremely self-indulgent. And good children's books never are. So my heart has always been in children's books. Oh, always.
Let's move on from publishing just momentarily. So you then go to a software bootcamp several years ago, it feels like a lifetime ago now, and that's where we met. So
Yes.
why, after everything you've done in publishing, why move on to tech?
As I worked my way up, um, everyone was always really interested in my interest in digital, but it was always a very outside thing, like, oh, we don't do that. It's exciting that you do that, but we don't do digital. I remember one particular meeting, probably in 2003, where we had a big sky idea meeting around this table. And it was like the big publisher and the head of marketing, and everyone was around the table. And little old me said, why don't we have a website where we sell our books, like, online? And I was literally laughed out the room. Not literally laughed out the room. I was laughed at, like, oh, ha, we don't do that. And I just remember being like, okay, well, if we don't do that, we don't do that. But, always in the back of my mind, it was, well, why? And then also, I'd constantly been trying to set up digital systems in all the places that I was, so scheduling systems and writer management systems. I was involved in the builds of a couple of databases, not from any technical standpoint, but from the briefing standpoint, because publishers have to handle loads of submissions. So how can we automate that process? And I was always trying to do that, but there was always so much, boxing it off. Digital is over there, but it has, but I don't need to learn it, and it's not to do with our core business. And then I joined this exciting new startup publisher, which was well funded by Bonnier. It was called Hotkey Books, and it was brand new, and it was run by the most amazing woman who had published all the Harry Potter books. She was the head of it, and she was setting up this new imprint called Hotkey Books, and it was going to be a digital, not digital first because it was a traditional publisher, but a middle grade and young adult publisher that could thrive in the digital world. And so we had this ambitious digital strategy. And in the beginning, there was a lot of money to throw at it. So we did some really exciting digital projects. But as things got entrenched, they became more entrenched in the way that publishing worked, which was much more traditional and much less experimental and innovative. And it got quite frustrating because the team and I would come up with these great marketing ideas or product ideas that could never see the light of day because they were so expensive to build, because it was always going to be outsourced. And, like 6-figure builds for just a little prototype. There was no internal skills. But luckily, the woman I mentioned who was running it, Sara Odedna, she saw a thing in me, I think, and she enabled me to go on these small courses. So the courses are now defunct, but it was I can't quite, Mint Digital, that's what it was. They did these 1 week things. So they did an HTML and CSS course for a week. It was full time for a week, and then later on, I did a Rails course with them where you built 5 websites in a day, and it was funded and supported by Sara, who didn't have to, right? Because that isn't, it was to the rest of the industry, that wasn't core publishing, but she still enabled me to do that with on the company time and dollar, and it just like opened my eyes. What you could do in a day, that you could build a Rails website in a day. I mean, nothing fancy, but you could get something onto the web using those structures and scaffolds. And then my naivety kicked in, and it was like, well, if I can't get the funding to do these things, then I'm going to learn to build it myself. And I know that I can because I just did this course. Now as someone who sort of runs courses, I can look back and see, well, obviously there was so much support and scaffolding in place for me to be able to make the things that I made. But it does absolutely lend itself to being able to get you on that path anyway. So I had a taste of it, and then I thought what I would do is I would learn it on my own. So I was like, in the evenings, I was trying to build a search engine in PHP from a tutorial, and it was agony. And it was agony because of the setup process of getting your machine ready to be able to build something. And I was a complete noob. I had no idea about anything, and the documentation assumed so much. So it would be like, and now you'll see this. And I didn't see that. And I had no idea how to fix it. And at that point, I knew I had to get help. I had to go where there were other people, where there was a lot more support for me. And so combined with the fact that the exciting, innovative, well-funded digital publisher had sort of pulled in the purse strings and fell into a trap, not from my immediate team, but from the wider team, of not being able to take risks and fund innovation, even on a small scale, and the sort of taste that I had for the power, the empowerment of being able to build stuff myself. I took a deep breath and said, right, I know I'm up here in my publishing career and everything's going great, but I'm just gonna start over from the bottom in a new industry and learn a whole new thing. So that's the background for that.
So, I mean, really, you were ahead of the curve in the publishing industry, which was at that time, I guess, facing digital as their main rival in competition and not wanting to adopt any digital practices.
Not internally. So I can't say, I think publishing definitely gets a bad rap for embracing digital. And there were lots of pockets of innovation going on. But there were also so many failed attempts. So people were spending, medium six figures building an entire website behind a paywall. There was nothing, you'd come to it and you couldn't see anything unless you paid. And some digital agency built that to the spec of the publisher without ever saying, you do realize this is completely not going to work. There was no understanding from the outside of the industry about the way the industry there wasn't the sort of education path. They were just like, groovy, we'll take your money and we'll build what you say. And so there were too many large scale, large spend projects that failed that made publishing go, well, this is not where the money is. We've spent all this money on doing this amazing, innovative thing, and there's no profit in it. But in other ways, they were definitely embracing digital, sometimes slowly. But so I don't want to say that publishing was resisting digital entirely, but they never brought in. They didn't bring in people from the outside to see from the inside of the industry the ways that the management software could improve or the ways that the product software could improve. And they didn't educate people that already knew the industry. And you hear a lot of people talk about build what you know, which they also say about for writers, write what you know, because the experience that you have bringing the new skill of digital to it, you can understand the problems without having to explain them to someone who has no idea what you're talking about or what your market is. But there wasn't, and I believe there still isn't, a drive to educate the people with the publishing experience and publishing skills in digital to understand what it's like to brief a software project, to build a software project, to make something a minimum viable project, and to test and iterate quickly. And I think that's because that takes a lot of investment in people and an investment in skill and tech, and that's not where publishing chooses to put its money just yet.
And so, for all those excellent reasons, you made the correct and the wonderful choice of going to this boot camp, becoming a coder, well, taking another string onto your bow, I guess, right? And I mean, I remember you smashed the course as far as I can remember. You did extremely well. You were such a strong. I mean, you were such a strong developer. A junior, even back then. And you were really really great at learning, right? And then you get your first job. It's not in publishing. Now, I have some memories of that time, and I think. Would it be fair of me to say, you wanted to get a foot in the door, you wanted to get a good tech job to sort of learn the ropes?
Yeah, I did try. So after Makers, I put together this video to explain to children's publishing why they wanted a developer as an editor on their team. And and I actually have kept the video, and I watched it again a few months ago, and it made me laugh. Um, Again, it was my naivety. Like, these are all the things I could do for you in a year. I could do this and that. But it sounded good. And actually, had I been on the receiving end of that video, I would have been very excited. But it would have all been lies. So nobody in publishing would hire me with my digital skills. And then I started looking in the children's digital industry, because there were a couple of projects and companies in the space at the time, and they didn't want juniors. They only wanted people to start, not even at a mid-level. They wanted you at a senior level, and I just couldn't keep up. So I had a couple of really bumpy interview experiences at that time, and sort of, it really surprised me that I couldn't just walk into a children's digital space with my new skills, but I couldn't. And so I went back to Makers, to a careers fair, and looked around, and I heard a talk from the guys at Exedra, and I saw how their company actually fit into publishing and fit into my experience, because they worked in a retail space on behalf of manufacturers, getting managing the financial relationship between manufacturers and retailers at scale. And so it was fascinating, and I was able to show that I understood the domain, because publishers and manufacturers selling into the same retailers that Weetabix is selling into at times, and they took a chance on me. And actually, I think that was the best and my only tech interview experience that I walked away from feeling confident, because their tech test, because they were SQL and they knew we didn't do SQL at Makers, they weren't looking for me to do a tech test in SQL. They asked me to write out in pseudocode the logic steps that I would follow for this problem that they'd put out. And I was really comfortable with that, because I could show my thinking and work through my thinking without having to worry about the syntax. And I could also do that on my own. No one was watching me do it. And although it was a great interview experience, actually, London had seized up that day because of a big rainstorm, and I was like 40 minutes late. And when I arrived, literally a drowned rat, because I'd had to get out of the taxi that had been stuck in traffic and run. But they were very understanding. Ed was very understanding, very nice. And they took a chance on me. And it was literally day one. Here is a stack of 4 SQL books. Learn it. But and even as I was learning, like on day 2 or day 3, I committed code to production, and it was such a thrill. Um, so working at Excedra wasn't a million miles away from the publishing experience that I had, um, and they were really great. They were a great diverse team. They were understanding and demanding, but also recognizing um, of talent. So I was able to progress quickly, which felt great. Um, but it definitely so yeah, it wasn't publishing and it wasn't children, so it didn't kind of make my heart sing. And I was always networking as well. So um, so uh, a, a guy that I knew at a publishing house introduced me to this woman. He was basically like, oh, tech and publishing, you should talk to this woman who's my now CEO, Emma Barnes. And she didn't live too far away from me, so she lives about 20 minutes away. And we met in a town a couple towns over and had lunch. And I just remember being blown away because she was a woman CEO of her own tech company. She was also an independent publisher of her own imprint called Snow Books, and she was a mom as well. And she taught herself to code when she had her baby. She sort of I'd seen her at a conference before, and she told the story of how she had her baby at her feet when she was learning to code. And I also had young children when I was at Makers learning. At the time, I was the only parent on the Makers course. I remember being really surprised. I was definitely one of the older ones, but I was the only parent. And I was just in awe of her. And actually, in between Makers and Excedra, she had given me an internship. So I guess the introduction would have taken place before I started at Excedra. And as I grew in experience and confidence, I think that company, her company, grew as well and developed to the point where they were trying to expand. And she reached out to me, and I just couldn't resist, because then it was coming back into the publishing fold, and into management systems, which is something that I have always had a very strong opinion about, having made some smaller ones and used a number of the industry standard ones. Um, I had a lot of opinions about how it could be improved. And she liked that. And I didn't have to do a tech interview for them. They took a chance on me. And that's where I've been ever since. So coming up to my 4-year anniversary there.
So you have this brief interlude from the publishing sort of space to pick up your tech skills, and then, through your hard work and your connections and networking, you then get an opportunity once again to enter publishing. Now, in digital as a technologist in publishing tech. So everything's kind of come full circle for you.
I love to say that I write the software I wish I could have used when I was an editor in publishing. Yeah, because I've literally been on both sides of the desk, both sides of the screen, and I like to say that I can focus on writing the software from a user perspective, because I know what it's like to click through an unfathomable system, because publishing is complex and it's basically edge case hell. Everything in publishing is, oh, it's almost standard except for this and that and this and that. And it just, there's just edge cases everywhere. And I can appreciate that. Whereas a technologist coming from the outside can be like, why that exception? And how can you, why would you do that? But the reasons are many, and you just have to, you got to roll with it. So, yep, back in publishing and happy to be here.
Can you give me a general sense of publishing tech? Because this is, there's so many different sub industries and niches in technology, so many jobs that a developer could do. Is this a good one? Where's the industry at right now?
There's sort of external software providers, and there's some small ones and some big ones. There's some new scrappy innovative ones that are coming up with smarter ways to proof a book, to typeset a book, to take the core content and put it into different formats, print and digital formats. There's then there's the sort of bigger players that have been around for a long time. There's distribution software. So, and that's an area that, in my opinion, needs a fair amount of disruption. And that's the systems that the publishers use to communicate with the warehouses of what books are coming out, how many books are in stock, and that kind of thing. And then there are internal projects, so big SAP integrations, so those are where they have in-house teams at publishers. So publishers like Hachette have a whole floor of developers working on proprietary business management software projects. And then for me, and my personal bias, the where it's lacking is there's not sort of prototyping teams in the core of the business, like in marketing or an editorial. So that's an area where, because the marketing teams are getting smarter and smarter about tracking technology and that kind of stuff, but I feel like there's so much more there that could be done. So there's internal teams. There's a lot of freelancing going on with the sort of more marketing and creative side of things, and then there's the sort of the bubbles all around that support the industry. But I think my core frustration is that there is too much acceptance of old bad systems, and there is not enough drive to standardize the data. Because the distribution networks are so opinionated. So, depending on who sends your books from the warehouse, you have to provide a different style of Onyx, which is the industry standard for data. There is a standard that is published. This is how your book data is supposed to get out into the world. But then your distributor will say, oh, well, sorry, we can only accept 5 authors. And you might have 6 authors on this book, so you have to pick one to leave off. And I'm really sorry that your author's name has a circumflex in it, but we don't accept that. So they can't have their actual name distributed on the interwebs because, we just can't handle that. Or, sorry, you can't send us, we can't connect to you via API. You've got to send us an Excel spreadsheet. And it's like, that just shouldn't be acceptable. Publishers should demand more of their software. It should be more user-friendly. It should be more standardized. And it should be, and it should, and I mean, I don't want to say it should be cheaper, because I definitely don't want to devalue publishing development, because it's expensive and time intensive, but they should embrace faster cycles for innovation and failure.
And I suppose to an extent, the old guard has to kind of die off and leave. The new guard have to come in with their new ideas.
I think so. And I can see that happening in a few big places and in lots of little places. There's definitely a change, but still not embracing it as a core necessity for most of the people in the business. There's far too much acceptance of, well, the editorial assistant can spend the next 6 hours manually copying it from this window into that window. It's unnecessary menial labor that they don't have the skills to fix, but someone with some digital skills on the inside could look at where the time is being wasted, to the nth degree. So you've got an editorial assistant in this imprint, and that imprint, and that imprint, and that print across a big company, and they're all spending 6 hours a week copying and pasting. There is huge savings to be made there, with someone coming in and writing a little Excel macro to just do it for them. It doesn't have to be a big project, but without if you dismantle the fear and encourage the learning, everyone might go, or many people might go, oh, I think I could maybe automate this. Maybe this is really bad, and maybe we should shout about this to our software provider and say, we won't accept this anymore. You have to change it. and yeah, so I guess that's what I want. I want the tech skills to be a tool that everyone in publishing and at many levels can reach to and say, actually, I think here is a tool. It could even be an external tool. Here is a tool I know that I could use to make this faster and less stupid, less manual labor, because publishing is such a desirable industry to work in. There are just, there's like 200 applicants for every entry level job. And so they pick the best and the brightest. And then they say, Groovy, you're going to spend the next 6 hours doing a menial task in Excel. These brilliant people should be empowered to come in and, to innovate, to drive creatively, to help bring actual value, core value, to the business, rather than, a monkey going, it's done. So actually, one of the really exciting things about the company that I work for is that Emma is such a vocal advocate of this, and we've run courses. We did a day of code for publishers in conjunction with a conference that they run called the Future Book, and we had I think it was 40 people from different publishers build a website using Ruby, build a book website using Ruby in a day. So we provided the scaffolding, and we put it all up on GitHub, and their little eyes, their eyes lit up and it twinkled. We talked about Slack integrations, how one of the publishers that is a client of our software has these tech skills, and their company talks in Slack. And so we provide a Slack hook so that they can type in the ISBN of their book and into a Slack channel, and it will return all of the main metadata of the book. And the publishers in the room, they were like, wait, what? We don't have to go in here and then log in and then click in 5 places to get that pub date. We could just, interact with it from computer to computer. And, I think once they spend some time to see the possibilities, there's such a buzz and an excitement, and lots of people that have gone on that course have now gone on to boot camps, and they're skilling themselves up. But the question will be is, will they come back into publishing? Because publishing is so London centric. It's so the salaries are so small. So if people from publishing get the tech buzz, how can they compete? How can publishing is not going to be able to compete. Publishing isn't competing with super creative, tech skilled up people. They're going to go and join the next startup and, have twice the salary. So that's an industry problem because they don't value it enough.
People watching and listening to us now it'll be very apparent to them exactly, how amazing, how bright and energetic and passionate you are about your work. And they can take my word for it that you're a really awesome coder as well. But something surprises me, which is that you actually have quite a lot of imposter syndrome.
I remember going to Makers, and I thought to myself, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to be so great. I'm just going to get it, and it's going to be wonderful. And I didn't. And it's not that it wasn't wonderful, but it was hard. It was an emotional roller coaster. And I remember, like tears in the toilet to jumping up in the air. It was the whole thing over the 12 weeks. And I remember, I think it's halfway through, the next cohort joins, right? So you've done your first 6 weeks, and then you move on to the sort of the senior school where you're starting to be more independent and build projects independently. And so they get another set of the first weekers coming in, and they asked the sort of, the people halfway through it to meet and mingle with the ones that were coming in to give some reassurance and talk about what the course is going to be like. And we were standing in the kitchen, people were making toast, and there was a woman, and she started talking about what's that? The kata, or the exercises, where you could sign in and get points for how many kata you did. I can't remember what website that is, but it was one of the ones that Makers encourage us to use. And I was like, oh man, I struggled to get whatever the minimum points were that they wanted you to get before you started. I was like, oh yeah, and I really struggled with it. And this one woman was like, oh no, because I'm at like 300. And I remember just those numbers, the stark numbers, and how I remember how much I struggled to get to whatever it was, 100 points that I was supposed to get to. And the sort of like curtains come down, and I was like, this isn't natural for me. It isn't a breeze. I'm really struggling. Have I made the right decision? And I've had that over and over and over again in so many different circumstances. Did I make the right decision? Should I really be here? I suck at this. And I used to teach writers, and they talk about how there's a voice in their head when they're writing, like literally every word that they've written is like, that's rubbish. You're so crap. No one's ever going to read this. It's the worst thing you've ever written. And I have that 80% of the time when I'm coding, I've got a voice in my head going, you've chosen the wrong thing. You can't call it that. You're not extracting to the right level. Basically, they're all going to laugh at you. So I've got that. And I feel like it's never going to go away. Like I don't, I've been in the same job for 4 years now. And yes, I'm learning a new language. So it's a Rails shop, but we've been using React for about a year, maybe 18 months now. And for about 8 months now, I've been building in React. And so I am learning a whole new thing. But even having the experience of learning a couple of languages before and now learning a third, it's still, you clearly don't get this. You're too slow. It's taking you forever. And since our initial conversation about this, I've been really kind of going over it. Like, if I'm going to talk about imposter syndrome, I can't just be like, yes, I really have imposter syndrome and it's never going to go away, without any kind of, I mean, I don't even know if I have advice, or that, because I'm such a victim of it. I guess there are two things that I can say in a sort of analytical point about it. Even though I have it, it doesn't stop me from doing anything. I still take on projects that, in my head, I'm screaming like, you're never going to be able to build this. This is never going to work. I still try. So even though I have it, I keep bashing away anyway. And I guess I just have to, I know I have to not let it defeat me. And so it just becomes another fight in I'll just keep going. And the other thing that has really helped calm it, or help me sort of reason with myself about it, is that recently I've been mentoring other people. So I was a mentor on the Black Coder course that was an online bootcamp. And having gone through a bootcamp, I know I can support them emotionally as well as technically. And that was so rewarding, being in the online lessons and supporting people quick fire, right, where they're asking questions about what they've just learned, but also mentoring someone through a personal project across several weeks, which was challenging. And there were definitely times where I didn't know how to help, or didn't know what the answer was. You sort of always know how to help because you encourage them to find the answers, or you find the answers together. But I've also been teaching young kids. So I didn't know much about 3D design or software, which I know, Sanj, that's where you were coming from.
Yeah.
But
Mm-hmm.
so I wanted to learn it. So I sort of drove myself to learn it by signing up for this grant where I got some equipment and I got to go into schools and teach kids Tinkercad. And when I started, I was like, this is bonkers. How can I go into a classroom and pretend to teach these kids when I don't even really know how to do it myself? But you learn, right? You learn because you have to. You learn because there's the fear that you're going to get it wrong, and the fear that you're stupid, driven by the fear of, well, I'm going to have to stand up in front of people and talk about it, or I'm going to have to be the person that has the answers when I'm mentoring. So, I just play my fears off each other. And when the fear of humiliation for not knowing becomes greater, then I learn, and I get through it. So I guess to my knowledge, there's no magic pill or button to turn it off. And, maybe in 5 years or 10 years, it will go away because I'll feel like I've been in the industry long enough. But, I sort of also mentioned to you, I've had some really awful interview experiences, which takes my confidence right back down to, junior dev times before I ever even got a job, thinking, well, clearly I'm not a real software developer because I can't answer this question about whether or not I should do an index on a timestamp or whatever. I mean, I do hope, and I worry that the way people are allowed to interview other people for jobs is an unfair advantage to people who don't suffer from imposter syndrome.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
and in that, these companies that are looking to hire the best and the brightest miss out on the best and the brightest because of the style of questions and the way that they talk to people. I'll never understand why they don't talk you through code you've written. They don't look at your projects that are online and go, tell me about this thing that you've made, rather than some arbitrary, thing where you've got to write code off the top of your head. As we spoke about before, I read this brilliant tweet online, which was from a woman who said, when you buy art from an artist, you look at their portfolio and see what you've done, and then you commission the artwork from them. You don't say, here are some watercolors, I'm going to watch you paint to decide whether or not I want to buy your painting. It's you take the work as it is, and maybe you can talk to them about it and say, oh, explain to me why you used those colors there. But there's no process under which you demand access to their mind to see how they think. You just look at the work that they've produced. And I know there's a lot of really smart companies that are doing it much more that way, talking to people about what they've made and who they are, rather than firing computer science questions at them and making them feel small.
So, you mentioned mentors. Now, I know you do. I mean, you're extremely modest. You wouldn't ever talk about this stuff yourself. So I'll talk about it on your behalf. You do a heck of a lot in social enterprise. You do a heck of a lot of volunteering. You mentor a lot of people. How about you? Who are your mentors?
So I have, this is such a big question, and I have really been sort of rolling it around since we talked about doing this. And I think I have to mention my CEO, Emma Barnes, who has always been such an inspiration because like I say, she had all the bits that I wanted to have. So her own, well, lots of her own companies. She is an independent publisher, so she set up her own independent publishing house and then built the software that she needed to make her independent publishing house run more smoothly. She is a mom, but also she's a sort of serial prototyper. So not only does she have Consonance, which pays my salary and many other people's salaries, and her publishing house, which is still publishing while she's running Consonance, but she's also set up a project called Make Our Book, which is bringing publishing into schools mostly, but anyone can use it. But it's mostly for classrooms of children to put in their stories into the web interface, which then gets made up into this beautiful printed book, which can be a fundraiser or whatever the school wants. And it's about making the children's voices heard. Everyone can find themselves in this book, and it just sets them on fire. She did a project with, I think it was the Leicester City Council or something like that, but it was maybe a whole county, I can't remember, of children in care. And because they're a distributed bunch of children, this type of project brought together all of their voices about being superheroes. And the council organized it and put it together and printed it in a beautiful book and sent it back out to those children. So all of those children that might be in disadvantaged situations got to see their voices, their stories, their illustrations in a beautiful book that looked just like a book they'd had on the shelf. And that's so empowering for so many reasons. It shows children from all different backgrounds that they can be authors, that their voices are valued. So just the way she approaches projects with the same, I think, naivety. Well, I can do that. I'll just make it. And she just does. And she puts it out there. And she's a serial bootstrapper. So not taking on big money. She's just making it work from the ground up. And I just, that's the way I want to be when I grow up. That's I want to be like Emma. And then I have to shout out to my mom as well, because I didn't know this until I was probably 18, and I was quite old, that my mom was in software before she had children. So she worked. So both of my parents are
Wow.
British, and my dad worked for Esso at the time, when they were a young married couple, and she worked for Nestle, or Nestles as she says it, because that's what it was back then. And she worked in HR and worked with punch cards and Fortran, and she could literally read the binary on the punch cards when trying to find like the bug in the system with these sort of punch cards of so she sort of tells these stories about it. And I didn't realize that I'm basically following in her footsteps, because after she was in software, when my dad moved over to America, she couldn't really work because she didn't have the working papers, and it was all about his career. And so she became a mom and went down that path. But then she went back to school and educated herself and became an architect for 3D design. So my mom worked in AutoCAD, and she had this big computer, and black with the green lines, and it was all sort of super impressive. And I never so previously I would sort of always attribute my digital skills to my dad, because he was in IT, and we had a computer in the house from very young, so I had, I could play Atari games and that kind of stuff when I was younger. But my mom is so driven, so she has also been the CEO of her own company. And it's so funny to me that, so she tells the story about how, because when I first moved over to England after New York, my partner and I lived in Croydon, and so and my parents also lived in Croydon when they were pre-children and married, and they came over to visit us when we were in Croydon, and I was getting on the train going into London for work, and my mom was getting on the train to go and visit her parents who lived in Sussex at the time. And she said she was looking across at me, like reliving her life, because that's what she did. She would walk to Croydon station and go into London for her job. Um, and I was doing the same thing. And I am, and it's sort of only in the past few years that I've realized that I am sort of really emulating my mom in that, teaching myself software, being creative as well, because she was interior design and architecture. And then I'm moving into the 3D space with all of my Tinkercad workings out. And it's such a core. I can't deny how much I'm emulating her and looking up to her and all the things that she's accomplished in her life. So go, mom, if you're listening.
If I could talk to that little voice in your head that tells you you're rubbish when you're coding, I would tell it to shut up and go away and leave Sarah alone, because she's an awesome coder, much better than me.
I
You
wouldn't
don't
say
deserve
that,
that.
but I'll try to picture you next time
Yeah.
where I'm having a flare up, and I'll say that Sanj says you have to go away.
Before I let you go, you know what I have to do. I've got to ask you what the joke of the show is.
Why don't seagulls fly over the bay? Because then they would be
I don't know
bagels.
why, because then there would be bagels. Awesome. Thank you
Sorry
very
about
much,
that.
Sarah. It's no need to apologize. It was wonderfully terrible. And that's all, folks. Thanks a lot for tuning in. For more info, for questions, comments, or feedback, please head on over to aheadintech.com and don't forget to subscribe.